So I like exploring the Harry Potter what-if scenarios, right? What if certain small details were different? How would that impact the overall story? Like the butterfly effect, right? A small thing can have a huge impact. So I recently made a video looking at 5 different what-if Harry Potter scenarios, which included Sirius raising Harry, Harry joining Voldemort, Harry being best friends with Draco, Snape being Harry's father, and Neville being the chosen one. And I realised a lot of those scenarios focused on Harry. So today we're going to look at some more Harry Potter what-if scenarios, but with more of a focus on Hermione and Ron and Ginny and like the supporting cast. So let's start with Hermione then, Hogwarts' very own brain box. What if she was an idiot?
Hermione Granger was the brightest witch of her age. But what if she wasn't? What if she hadn't read every single magical book from cover to cover 3 times before she even went to her first day at Hogwarts? What if she couldn't quite grasp, well, anything? I want to investigate how the Harry Potter series would change if Hermione Granger was an idiot. Let's see how far the trio makes it. So Hermione cements herself as a brain box from the first time we meet her on the Hogwarts Express. She's already a self-assured know-it-all when she mocks Ron's magic. Oh, is that a real spell, or is that from the book of Idiot's magic? Sorry, are you trying to conjure up a yellow rat, or conjure up a brain for yourself? Oh, are you doing that spell, Aloha Moron? And once she's done absolutely destroying Ron's ego the day they meet, she starts bragging about how she's already memorized all of the set textbooks, and this bragging goes all the way through their classes in their first year. She really is, in the words of Severus Snape, an insufferable know-it-all. Now I like the idea in this scenario of Hermione being just as self-assured in her own mind, except in practice she's just completely useless. Like raising a hand every class, I know, except she doesn't. I like the idea of her mocking Ron in Charms when he can't levitate a feather, and then she's like, oh, I'll do it, and then she fails just as badly. Please, it's Leviosa, not Leviosa. No, don't swish and flick. Swish and... But if Hermione is about as bright as Vincent Crabbe's future, she wouldn't be able to help Ron learn Wingardium Leviosa. And that's not just about him passing a test in Charms, because later on we get a... So if Hermione doesn't help Ron learn that charm, he can't use it against the troll to save her and him and Harry. So the troll might seriously hurt them in the bathroom. Now I don't think it would kill any of them because McGonagall and the other teachers show up in time. They could stop it from killing any of the 3, but it would be a close call. And we're gonna get a few of those in this video. So then we get to the end of the year and the trio are gonna head through the trapdoor to try and save the Philosopher's Stone. They go to the trapdoor at the end of the year and they probably get past Fluffy quite easily. That sort of had nothing to do with Hermione. It was just Hagrid being a moron. Oh, I accidentally told you Fluffy goes to sleep when he hears music and then bought you a flute for your birthday. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. So they get past Fluffy easy enough, but Devil's Snare is a different story. Rather than identifying the plant and knowing exactly how to stop it, Hermione's just going to be like, oh, yeah, look at these leaves. Ah! Oh, is that a Christmas tree? Where are the baubles? Goodness, this plant seems to be crushing my internal organs. How does it smell? Ooh, lovely. You know, Harry and Ron, I reckon if we struggle really hard, this plant will just let us go, and it certainly won't make things worse. So if Hermione doesn't know what plant it is, or how to conjure fire, then the Devil's Snare is probably going to kill all 3 of them. Because before Hermione saves them in the book, the Devil's Snare is wrapping around Ron's throat and squeezing all of the air out of Harry's chest. So without Hermione's knowledge saving them, they all just perish there and then. I don't want this video to just be 2 minutes long. So let's say Harry and Ron are getting desperate as they're fighting to stay alive. Maybe Harry remembers deep in his mind somewhere that Dudley was talking about Pokemon one summer and oh, grass types are weak to fire. Oh, I should use fire on the Devil's Snare. And then he tries a fire spell, and that gets them all through. And then there's the chess match, and Ron sacrifices himself, and that all happens as normal. And then we get to Snape's riddle. And Hermione, remember, is self-assured despite being a blithering idiot. She'd read the riddle, and she'd be like, yes, I understand. Harry, you need to take this potion. And she'd be wrong, and Harry probably takes poison by accident. But one thing we do know is that Dumbledore was not far behind them when they went through the trapdoor, so let's hope Dumbledore comes by just in time to stop Harry from poisoning himself, to stop Hermione probably just walking through the wall of fire, burning to death, saving the 3 of them, stopping Quirrell, and they live to see another day. Or should I say, another year of disasters, because Hermione is an idiot. So the Chamber of Secrets doesn't rely too much on Hermione's brilliance. There are two main points that Hermione being an idiot would mostly impact. The first is the Polyjuice Potion. Now remember, Hermione knows less about magic than Uncle Vernon does. So she's not going to be successful in brewing that Polyjuice Potion. Even when she does it well, she ends up turning into a cat. So just imagine how badly this could go. I like to think at this point, Harry and Ron are used to how much she messes up. And so they just step in and say, you know what, Hermione, don't worry about it. So they don't brew the Polyjuice Potion, they can't quiz Malfoy about the Chamber of Secrets. So they probably spend the whole year thinking that Malfoy is the heir of Slytherin behind the opening of the chamber. The second big impact that Hermione's brilliance has in this book is pipes. Because in this scenario, reading is as difficult to Hermione as smelling is to Voldemort. So if Hermione doesn't work out the plumbing issue, then Harry and Ron will never figure out the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets is in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. And so, as happens in so many of my what-if scenarios, Ginny Weasley dies in the chamber that year. And in addition to that, Tom Riddle's memory from the diary achieves full corporeal being. Things are pretty bad. Surely they can't get any worse. Regardless of us now having a Voldemort on the loose, there is no way that this Hermione is taking dozens of classes. Even if she wants to, there is no way McGonagall lets her, and no way in hell she gets given a time turner. And without a time turner, Sirius and Buckbeak are about as dead as Hermione's ambitions to become Minister for Magic. So the Goblet of Fire then. So Sirius is dead, and Voldemort is back. Hermione being an idiot is not good for the wizarding world. Then what? Well, when Harry and Ron fall out in the Goblet of Fire, Hermione puts a lot into helping Harry prepare for the first task. Teaching him, helping him practice a bunch of spells, not least of which is the summoning charm. But in this scenario, Hermione offers about as much help to the situation as Moaning Myrtle offers to an arm wrestling competition. None of the sessions practicing spells is going to go well at all. So we're going to do the summoning charm, Harry. I've read about this one. You just point your wand and then say, Avada Kedavra. Harry? Harry? Harry is going to be so underprepared for this tournament. He's probably going to get mauled by a dragon in the first task. I mean, he won't die because there are so many safety precautions in place for this tournament, but he's going to be badly messed up. With that in mind, Barty Crouch Jr. pretty much will make sure he gets through the rest of the tournament as he should. He needs to make sure Harry gets to the graveyard. Although that's probably redundant because we already have a Voldemort walking around from the Chamber of Secrets, but I guess their mission is to revive fetus Voldemort and have two of them wandering around. Another thing we can thank Hermione's idiocy for. So Barty Crouch Jr. makes sure Harry gets to the graveyard, Cedric dies. Things would play out quite similarly. The only other change would be that in this scenario, Hermione reads about as much as Malfoy thinks Goyle can read. So with Hermione spending less time in the library, her relationship with Victor never really flourishes. And Ron never has his, Hermione's a girl. Even if he did, he'd be like, wait, Hermione, you're a girl. And she'd just be like, wait, am I? So Ron never really gets jealous, and it never kickstarts their romantic relationship. But let's put a pin in that for now. In their 5th year, Hermione being a complete moron changes a lot about the DA. Not only is Harry teaching the DA a lot of the spells that Hermione helped him learn in the Goblet of Fire, spells that he wouldn't now know because she can't teach him anything, but also Hermione's ability to cast a Protean charm, despite it being any WT level magic, was instrumental in convincing characters like Terry Boot to join the DA. But now the most convincing thing she can do is tie her own shoelace, and I'm not even sure she'd be able to do that. Not to mention, without Hermione being able to do this charm, the DA would never be able to communicate without Umbridge and the Inquisitorial Squad finding out. So even if they do make a Dumbledore's army in this book, they wouldn't have half as many members, they would have no idea how to communicate when and where they were meeting, and Harry would know half as many spells to teach the other members. Also, remember Hermione planned the whole DA thing in the first place, and if she's this much of a moron, she would have probably forgotten to even tell anybody about it. So Harry, there's this secret meeting where I want you to teach people Defense Against the Dark Arts. Okay, Hermione, where is everyone? Well, it's a secret, so obviously I didn't tell anyone. Duh. Either way, with a less competent, less organised DA, things at the end of the year are gonna go pretty badly. Firstly, Hermione being an idiot means she's less likely to think of her trick to lure Umbridge out to the Forbidden Forest when she's captured everyone, which means Harry and Hermione wouldn't be free of her. But also, when they make their way to the Ministry for the final battle, everybody is less competent. In the final battle, they're using spells that they learned in the DA, but they just wouldn't know them in this scenario. And even the ones they do know, they won't have had a chance to practice as often. And so we probably lose a lot of them to the Death Eaters. So imagine Harry's trauma in The Half-Blood Prince if he didn't just lose Sirius, but he lost a bunch of his friends too, all because he lured them recklessly into a trap. But despite Harry's trauma, I don't think The Half-Blood Prince changes much just because Hermione is worse at magic than Filch. The plot of this book doesn't hinge too much on her intelligence, but the Deathly Hallows does. In their final year, a lot changes. You see, the Horcrux hunt would be a complete disaster if Hermione is dimmer than the lighting in the dungeons. Firstly, she won't be able to do the bag with the undetectable extension charm, because she just couldn't. Undetectabitis. Oh no, I've accidentally made it a really detectable extension charm. And regardless, even if she did have the bag sorted, she's not going to proactively pack everything. Okay, I think we need a pen. Yep, got that. 2 very perishable apples. Harry likes Quidditch, so I'll pack a quaffle. Oh, Ron went out with lavender. I'll put in some lavender essential oils. And that's quite literally all of the essentials. And so when Bill and Fleur's wedding is interrupted and they have to flee, they will have nothing. No tent, no books, no food, no supplies. And even if they did manage to find a tent and pitch it somewhere, Hermione's the one that does all of their protection charms. But not here. Okay, Harry and Ron, I've done all of the protection charms. Hermione, you've accidentally done a charm that makes us shout every word. Oops, my mistake. Perhaps the Cruciatus Curse will help. Regardless of all of that, how are they possibly going to plan an infiltration of the Ministry of Magic without Hermione's brains? How will Harry escape from Nagini in Godric's Hollow without Hermione's quick thinking? Oh, Harry, Bathilda seems to be turning into a snake, and the snake seems to want to kiss you. Oh, how friendly. Oh, it's eating your face. Oh, perhaps that's hello in snake talk? I don't speak Parseltongue, so I wouldn't know. So the events of the Deathly Hallows, with Hermione having about as much knowledge as Gilderoy Lockhart after the Chamber of Secrets, it's bleak. There is no way they find all of the Horcruxes, let alone destroy them. Does that mean that Voldemort wins? Well, not necessarily, but it does at the very least mean that the war lasts longer. I think eventually Harry would ask for help from other members of the Order of the Phoenix. So then, who knows if they manage to stop Voldemort? He's had all this extra time running around with unforgivable curses. Maybe he's killed everybody and he's just become too powerful.
So realistically, if Hermione Granger was an idiot, everybody would die. And even if we give her some grace and everybody doesn't die right away, they still at least end up losing the war and probably die anyway. Speaking of death, what if Ron Weasley had died when he sacrificed himself in the giant chess match in the Philosopher's Stone? Let's find out.
Harry, Ron, Hermione. What an iconic trio. They're like Luke, Leia, and Han, or the Three Musketeers. Trios don't come much more famous. So what if we killed one of them? Ron came close to dying quite a few times, not least of which was in the Philosopher's Stone when he sacrifices himself in the giant game of wizard's chess.
Once I make my move, and you're free to check the king.
Oh, wrong clip, sorry. So I wanted to investigate what would happen if Ron died in the first book. So why did I have to kill Ron? Why didn't I just pick Hermione? Well, for one, the author actually said she almost killed Ron out of spite at one point while she was writing the books. And not only that, I feel like Ron is kind of underrated. People feel like he's kind of just comic relief or a goofy sidekick. So I wanted to prove those naysayers wrong and deep dive the impact Ron actually had on the series. Plus, there were just so many situations where Ron could have died. We'll focus on the first main one, Ron dying in the chess match. So, we're killing Ron. He sacrifices himself in the giant wizard's chess match and dies a hero. Harry goes on to stop Quirrell, and Ron is known wizarding worldwide for being the one that saved them all from Voldemort's return. Although if we learn anything from the Order of the Phoenix, no one in the wizarding world would believe that Voldemort was going to return anyway. Either way, Ron dies in the chess match, and the end of the Philosopher's Stone doesn't really change much, although there'd probably be less celebrating. So Harry's second year rolls around, and nobody saves him from the Dursleys. Sure, the twins could have, but without Ron telling them about Harry and the Dursleys, would they have? I feel like they'd probably be busy with their family mourning the death of their brother. So Harry spends the entire summer with the Dursleys, and after Dobby's mischief, it's a miserable summer. And then when the barrier to platform 9 3/4 is closed, Harry has no Ron, no Weasleys, no flying car, no way of getting to Hogwarts. And let's face it, the Dursleys wouldn't wait around for him either. So he's just stranded at King's Cross. Now perhaps he accidentally summons the night bus here, or he waits around and the staff at Hogwarts realise he hasn't showed up, or after Ron's death maybe Dumbledore's watching him a bit more closely and he sends someone to collect Harry. Either way, I think eventually Harry finds his way back to Hogwarts feeling very alone and feeling very sorry for himself. So a lot of the year plays out the same, and eventually Hermione gets petrified, which leads to Harry following the spiders by himself, eventually ending up at Aragog's lair. With no Ron and no Ford Anglia to save him, it's actually very likely that Harry dies here. I can't think of any way without the car rescuing him that he escapes dozens, if not hundreds, of very hungry acromantula. If somehow he were able to, maybe the centaurs save him for some reason, although apart from Firenze, I can't see any of them doing that. But imagine they do and he gets out, what other impact would Ron's absence have? Well, obviously there'll be a big change to the whole Gilderoy Lockhart scenario. I can see Harry, in an attempt to make up for Ron's death, trying to help Lockhart save Ginny after she's taken into the chamber at the end of the year. So Harry takes Lockhart to the Chamber of Secrets at one point, and in the same way that he did with Ron's, I imagine Lockhart steals Harry's wand here. But Harry's wand isn't broken, it's perfectly functioning, which means Lockhart's memory charm wouldn't backfire. So Lockhart's memory charm is successful, Harry loses his mind, Ginny dies in the chamber. And without Harry there to stab the diary at the last minute, Voldemort would return to full strength, having magically sapped the life out of Ginny. So, if Harry wasn't killed by Aragog, it's safe to assume he's completely lost his mind. In the Order of the Phoenix, when we see Lockhart, he can't remember anything about his life. And since that's the very charm that backfired, but in this scenario wouldn't have, it's safe to assume Harry would be in exactly the same situation. So Harry can't remember anything, and meanwhile Ron is dead. With Ron dead, it's unlikely Scabbers would be in the picture of the Weasleys after they won the lottery and went to Egypt. If he's not in that picture, Sirius Black doesn't recognise him as Wormtail, and so Sirius never breaks out of Azkaban. And without Sirius breaking out, nobody uncovers the truth about Wormtail faking his own death. So, thanks to the Chamber of Secrets and Tom Riddle's diary, we have a full-strength Voldemort on the prowl. Meanwhile, Harry has either been killed by giant spiders or is completely brain-dead in St. Mungo's. Now, Wormtail doesn't need to return to Voldemort because Sirius and Remus don't know the truth about him faking his death. They still think he's dead. But I think Voldemort's return would scare him and the other Death Eaters, and many of them would end up returning. But remember, they're returning to Diary Tom Riddle, which raises the question, what happened to weird fetus Voldemort? Presumably after the whole Quirrell thing, he's still floating around somewhere. So what if the Death Eaters, maybe Wormtail, maybe somebody else, is able to recover weird fetus Voldemort, kidnap brain-dead Harry from St. Mungo's, and perform the resurrection ceremony in the graveyard? In theory, at that point, we've got two full-strength Voldemorts, and presumably after the ceremony, Harry is killed comfortably by the two of them, especially considering he can't remember how to do any magic at all. So Ron's dead, Harry's probably not that close to the Weasleys, and so by extension, the Weasleys probably aren't that close with Dumbledore. A lot of the interactions we see between the Weasleys and Dumbledore come via Harry. If we think of one interaction specifically, the end of the Goblet of Fire, the Weasleys are at Hogwarts to support Harry in the Triwizard Tournament. That's when they learn of Voldemort's return, and that's when Dumbledore recruits them to the Order of the Phoenix. And by the Battle of Hogwarts, more than 50% of the Order of the Phoenix is Weasley. But in this scenario, that's very unlikely. Not only are they less likely to be recruited just because they have fewer interactions with Dumbledore, but also Ron died on Dumbledore's watch in his first year at Hogwarts. And the following year, Ginny would have died in the Chamber of Secrets in her first year on Dumbledore's watch as well. And by that point, I don't think the Weasleys are that likely to follow Dumbledore anymore, which means half the Order aren't part of the Order anymore. So, Ron dies in the Philosopher's Stone. The following year, Harry is either killed by Aragog or rendered brain-dead by Gilderoy Lockhart. Ginny Weasley then dies in the Chamber of Secrets, and shortly after, two full-strength Voldemorts are roaming the streets trying to take over the wizarding world. 50% of the Order of the Phoenix are not part of the Order of the Phoenix. So Voldemort basically has twice as much power, and the Order of the Phoenix has half as much to resist him. I think the wizarding world is screwed. All this because Ron Weasley dies in his first year at Hogwarts. So to the people out there who think Ron is unimportant, who think he's just comic relief or some goofy sidekick, that he really didn't help kill Voldemort, that was all Harry and Hermione, well, I think I've made my point.
So Ron, as it turns out, is pretty important. Book Ron. It could never be movie Ron. Sticking with the Weasleys, what would happen if Ginny Weasley was sorted into Slytherin House rather than Gryffindor? What if Ginny Weasley was sorted into Slytherin? What if she became the first Weasley to not be a Gryffindor? How would that impact her relationship with her family? How would it impact her relationship with Harry? And what other changes would it make to the Harry Potter series as a whole? Let's dive in and find out. So if Ginny Weasley wasn't sorted into Gryffindor, which other house would be the obvious choice for her? She's ambitious, she's resourceful, she's strong-willed, that's for sure. I think she'd be a good fit for Slytherin. We see multiple examples through the series where traits that could see Ginny fitting into Slytherin house are on display for all to see. She's ambitious. We hear her use the phrase, anything's possible if you've got enough nerve. She says that in the Order of the Phoenix, and it feels like a very Slytherin phrase. Plus, she goes on to become the Queen of Quidditch. She shows plenty of cunning through the series as well. For example, Mrs. Weasley catches her using dung bombs, and when she asks about it, Ginny blames Crookshanks. Blaming a cat who can't defend themselves feels very Slytherin, don't you think? She shows leadership, both in her role in the Gryffindor Quidditch team and in leading the rebellion in the Deathly Hallows. Plus, to overcome being possessed by Voldemort when you're 11 years old and then go on to become one of the strongest, fiercest, most popular and able witches at Hogwarts, that shows resourcefulness. Ginny has everything required to be a Slytherin. And then think what her being in Slytherin would do to the plot. First, the dynamic of a Weasley in Slytherin would be so interesting by itself. And I know in the first draft of the Goblet of Fire, apparently the idea was to have a Weasley cousin in Slytherin, so it was an idea that was always floating around. But secondly, we needed a Slytherin character who was a bit more favourable way earlier in the series. Because until Slughorn comes along, pretty much all the Slytherins are just out and out awful. We have 5 books of Slytherin being represented by Draco Malfoy, who bullies people, calls them mudbloods, mocks people's dead parents, and reveres his father for being a Death Eater. And also Severus Snape, who was a Death Eater, and also mocked and ridiculed literal children when he's their teacher. So a favourable Slytherin like Ginny earlier in the series would have been much, much better for the story and for the representation of Slytherin House. And third, the heir of Slytherin plot would have been so much more interesting if Ginny was in fact in Slytherin's own house. And finally, the extra conflict in Harry having feelings for Ginny if she was in Slytherin just brings an extra dynamic to that whole relationship. We're going to cover all of those points and more later on in the video in more depth. But the point is, Ginny fits Slytherin, and the plot would have been better for it. But exactly how would her time at Hogwarts have played out? So Ginny rocks up to the Hogwarts sorting ceremony in the Chamber of Secrets. Harry and Ron miss it because of the whole flying car incident. So then imagine when they get to the dorm and Ron asks where Ginny is, and Fred and George and Hermione have to break it to him that actually she was sorted into Slytherin. I'll come on to how the siblings will react to this in the next part of the video, but I don't think Ron reacts very well to that at all. But from Ginny's perspective, Ginny is already very, very shy anyway at this point. Even when she's sorted into Gryffindor, she feels like an outcast, so imagine if she wasn't. Plus, she's about to have the toughest first year maybe anybody has at Hogwarts in the history of the school. So at this point, not only is she the only girl in a family of 6 other brothers, but she's also the only Slytherin in a family of Gryffindors. Already, we've got more about her character than there was in the movies, at least. And in the Chamber of Secrets, she's already withdrawn and sheepish and shy in her interactions with Harry anyway. First because she has a crush on him, but also because she secretly opened the Chamber of Secrets and set a basilisk on a bunch of Muggleborns. But her being a Slytherin adds another dynamic to some parts of the Chamber of Secrets that are already vital to the plot. For example, when she wants to come clean to Harry about everything, but then Percy comes along and so she gets a bit awkward and shy and runs off. The excuse that she's awkward because she's been put into Slytherin and she feels like an outcast, it already compounds. It compounds all of the things we already get from her character. Plus, it's another aspect of why she might spill her soul out to Tom Riddle's diary. We'll come to that in depth later in the video as well, because so many more things happen when it comes to Tom Riddle's diary now that Ginny's in Slytherin. So Ginny's relationship with her siblings will no doubt change if she's a Slytherin, most notably with Ron. Because Ron is sort of proven through the series to be quite closed-minded and set in his ways. We see it when he talks about giants, when he talks about werewolves, when he talks about goblins. These unconscious biases that sort of find their way into his opinions that he never questions. And so because of these biases he has about Slytherin, I think his relationship with Ginny in the first couple of years would be quite strained. He'd start to lump her in with the likes of Draco Malfoy. Maybe he'd stop talking anytime she approached the trio around Hogwarts. I really think he would struggle with her being a Slytherin the most. And so I think Ron struggles the most because of those biases, but also because he's the youngest of all of her siblings, and he's the least emotionally mature, as Hermione later points out.
It's because you've got the emotional range of a teaspoon.
Fred and George would probably just sort of laugh it off, make a few jokes, maybe insensitively given how much Ginny would be struggling with it, but ultimately I don't think they'd care that much. They'd just be fine with it. And I can even see them making a joke about Ginny when the Chamber of Secrets is first opened, like, oh, Ginny's a Slytherin, suddenly the chamber's opened, without realising the weight to that joke. And when it comes to Percy, he seems very by and for the system. And so I don't think he'd be that reductionist about the sorting system or the houses. I think he'd just put weight behind some of the Slytherins that he admires and lists them. Like, oh, Ginny's in Slytherin, so was Merlin, that's fine. He'd tell Ron that his view on Slytherins was too simplistic. And so the rest of the Weasleys who aren't at Hogwarts, I think, they'd be fine mostly. There would maybe be this slight undertone that she's the first Weasley to not be a Gryffindor, but ultimately that would be overpowered by their love for her. Molly would probably be more worried than disappointed that she was alone in Slytherin without her brothers to, back her up, given how shy she is to begin with. But Ginny, being an awkward 11-year-old girl with lots of insecurities, she'd focus on these awkward moments. She'd take Fred and George's jokes to heart, and she'd struggle with Ron's reaction. And that would really feed into her relationship with the entire trio. Ginny, by the end of the series, is very close to Harry, Ron and Hermione, but if she was in Slytherin, in the early books at least, she wouldn't really get the chance to get that close with them. The time she's with them in the common room, well, they just wouldn't happen. When she sat with them in the Great Hall during the feasts, when everyone sits with their houses, she wouldn't be sat with them then either. The interactions she has with Harry and Ron in Quidditch in the later years, none of those would happen. And that's not to say they couldn't get close if she's not Gryffindor, because they befriend Luna and she's a Ravenclaw. But there's just something a little bit different about Slytherin, isn't there? For example, Luna gets close to the trio because of the DA, but there aren't any Slytherins in the DA at all. In fact, the Slytherins tend to join the Inquisitorial Squad with Umbridge to try and stop the DA from happening. And so if Ginny were in the DA, sharing a common room with the Inquisitorial Squad, feels like that might be a sticky situation, particularly if Draco Malfoy were to corner her in Slytherin common room. At that point, not only is he popular and has a lot of sway with the other Slytherins, but he's also a prefect, so he could make her life in Slytherin pretty miserable, but more on that later in the video. So Draco being Harry's main rival, Draco displaying anti-Muggleborn tendencies, Draco being proud that his father is a Death Eater. If we assume that Ginny's personality doesn't change much despite being sorted into Slytherin, well then the two of them sharing a common room would make an interesting dynamic indeed. Because Ginny would be fond of Harry and she's not exactly one to bite her tongue, particularly if Malfoy were to make jokes about Harry. And then if he made slurs about Muggleborns, Ginny would probably stand up for them. Or would she? If Ginny's core circumstances at Hogwarts no longer saw her being surrounded by Gryffindors, and instead her downtime was spent with people like Malfoy, Crabbe and Goyle, not specifically those people, but similar people to them, and that happens a lot in the books, all Slytherins are grouped together as having similar mentalities. If those were the people she spent most of her downtime with in Hogwarts, would she grow into the kind of person who would stand up for those less able to stand up for themselves? It's the old nature versus nurture argument, and it's really hard to say, but if she were to still be the same sort of person and she were to stand up for the people who deserved standing up for, it would kind of be like the interactions we have in Gryffindor common room between Hermione and Fred. Hermione telling Fred he can't test his puking pastels on unwitting first years, but way more weighted because it's about prejudice and anti-Muggleborn mentalities. I know the story is sort of told from Harry's perspective, so we'd never see them, but they'd still be interesting interactions to hear about. Now, we've touched on this a little bit, but the Tom Riddle diary plot becomes way more significant with Ginny as a Slytherin. Firstly, the fact that Riddle's diary and the Chamber of Secrets are all to do with Slytherin makes Ginny, as a Slytherin now, far more of a significant choice for Tom Riddle to try and possess. Not only because of the link to Slytherin and Tom Riddle as Slytherin's heir, but also when Ron finds out Ginny's the one who opened the Chamber of Secrets, he'd start to have an existential crisis. Because he'll assume Ginny is the heir of Slytherin, which by extension would make him and all of his brothers also the heirs of Slytherin. And I really think seeing Ron go through that existential crisis in the lead up to the climax of the Chamber of Secrets would be such a cool plot. Such a cool little moment to see him panicking about it. Of course focused on saving his sister first, but worried about his heritage secondly. But also in the Chamber of Secrets we have Harry, who's a Gryffindor feeling like maybe he should have been a Slytherin, and Ginny being a Slytherin feeling like she ought to have been a Gryffindor like the rest of her family. The two of them sort of moving on the same path, just in opposite directions. There's a lot of circle theory in Harry Potter, a lot of symmetry to the plots, which I'll make another video about later, and so those two doing that sort of dance with opposite circumstances just feels so fitting to the series. Beyond all of that though, we have Riddle's diary. If Ginny was a Slytherin, she'd have so much more to emotionally unload onto the memory of Tom Riddle. The only daughter with 6 brothers, having a crush on Harry who doesn't notice her, then being the first Weasley in a generation or two at least to be sorted not into Gryffindor, the feeling of being a letdown to her family, an outsider to them all. And not only an outsider to them, but an outsider to her house as well. Because the Weasleys are the biggest blood traitors in the wizarding world. A blood traitor in Slytherin would kind of struggle to make friends. So of course, she'd have a lot to open up to Riddle's diary about. And that makes her possession by the diary even deeper and even more significant. But in turn, that gives her more room to grow. So after she's been possessed by Voldemort, the only way for Ginny is up. And we see by her character growth in the series as we know it, that by the Order of the Phoenix she is confident, she is competent, she is popular, and even more so than in the Half-Blood Prince. And I think that glow up from Ginny, that character development, it would be even more significant if she had spent her time at Hogwarts as a Slytherin. If she spent her entire first 2 years trying to make friends from Slytherin but failing because they want nothing to do with her, being outcasted by her Slytherin peers, well, by her later years, Ginny wouldn't care. She'd befriend Luna, she'd befriend Neville because they're kind of outcasts too. And so at that point, she would grow into almost exactly the character she grows into anyway. Standing up for herself, standing up for others, standing up to people like Malfoy and Crabbe and Goyle and Blaise and Pansy. And then we would have so much opportunity for great moments. Seeing Ginny make the Quidditch team and coming to blows with Malfoy. Maybe, oh God, I'd love this, if she became the Quidditch captain and she kicked him off the team, or she refused his father's bribes to keep him there. And all of these little moments would build up to her maybe being the only Slytherin to join Dumbledore's army. So with Ron's uncertainty around his Slytherin sister, I think Ginny joining the DA would be a really interesting subplot in the Order of the Phoenix. Because on the one hand, everyone would be really nervous about the only Slytherin who wants to join the DA, but on the other hand, Ginny would make the point that, well, she's never going to join the Death Eaters, especially after her possession by Tom Riddle just a couple of years earlier. And because of all of that, now that Voldemort is back, she needs to defend herself. And Umbridge's lessons aren't helping her as much as they're not helping anybody else. If she's already friends with Luna and Neville, that would carry some weight too. And so I can imagine this impassioned speech from her, making her case as to why she should be allowed to join, when someone like Justin Finch-Fletchley or Zachariah Smith is saying, no, you're a Slytherin. And I think that would be really cool for the plot, having those inter-house politics within the DA, especially when the rest of her house are then recruited to the Inquisitorial Squad to try and find out and shut down the DA. And Malfoy would know Ginny was in the group. And I'd love to hear or see instances of him trying to corner her to get information about Dumbledore's army, and then when he tries to intimidate her, she uses the spell she's learning in the DA to hex him out of her way. And then in the scene where the Inquisitorial Squad does get to Dumbledore's army because Marietta Edgecombe had the information pulled out of her, everyone would think it was Ginny. And all of this progress she seemed to be making and fitting in with everyone would sort of come undone. until she helps them break free from Umbridge's office, goes with them to the Ministry and fights the Death Eaters alongside them, which is when everyone's reservations about her are completely broken down. And then when she's accepted by the others, she can maybe start to influence her own house, make it better from the inside. Ginny's strong moral compass, accompanied by how strong and popular she is, well, I think that once she gets into her 5th year and she's more comfortable with who she is as a person, finally feeling like she has a support system, and finally finished fighting the fact that she's a Slytherin. Try saying that sentence 5 times fast. When you pair her finally being accepted by everyone with the fact that Slughorn is now at Hogwarts as an example of another Slytherin who's not entirely evil, well, I think she'd have a really positive influence on Slytherin House. People like Malfoy and Pansy and Crabbe and Goyle are too far gone, sure. But the other Slytherins? Maybe some of the younger ones who need a good role model? I like to think that with her influence and her example, maybe we'd have a few more Slytherins joining the rebellion in the Deathly Hallows. A few more of them standing up to Malfoy, and maybe even a few more of them standing up to Snape. So as a Weasley in Slytherin, Ginny would have an interesting relationship with Professor Snape. On the one hand, Snape may be more lenient with her than he is with her Gryffindor siblings because she's in his house, and he's always given favouritism to people in Slytherin. But she's also popular, intelligent, pretty, red-haired, very strong-willed, and she's starting to sound a little bit like one Lily Evans that we know Snape had a soft spot for. Or leaning slightly more towards an obsession than just a soft spot, but you get the point. But on the other hand, she's still a Weasley. She's still close to Harry, who Snape hates. And frankly, she wouldn't put up with Snape berating and torturing literal children when he's supposed to be their teacher, especially as she gets older, more self-assured. So maybe Snape would be slightly lenient to her because she's in his house, wouldn't want to take away too many points from her, but when she starts telling him to stop threatening certain students' toads with poison, well, I think he'd start to get a bit defensive, and then he'd start treating her like he treats every other student who's not in Slytherin. Every other student who dares to stand up to him, which means badly. He'd treat her badly. So the Second Wizarding War would roll around, and before the events of the Order of the Phoenix, before Ginny joined the DA, before she fought in the Ministry alongside Ron, Harry, Hermione, Neville and Luna, Ginny may still be treading on eggshells as the only Weasley who's in Slytherin. So having her at Grimmauld Place, around Sirius in particular, who is notoriously anti-Slytherin because of his family, especially since that's the dawn of the Order of the Phoenix and they need to start planning their defense against Voldemort, knowing full well that Ginny is going to go and share a common room with Draco Malfoy for a year might be quite an awkward, touchy summer. Through no fault of Ginny's, of course. But after the Order of the Phoenix plays out, after Ginny has proved she's a pick-me Slytherin, she's not like all the other Slytherins, well, I think her fighting the Death Eaters at the Ministry alongside the DA and the Order, that would probably count as her proving herself, right? And so her role in the Second Wizarding War, most notably heading up that rebellion at Hogwarts with Neville and Luna, well, I think that would continue in exactly the same way in the Deathly Hallows, except that with her influence over certain Slytherin students, maybe we'd see more of a sympathetic contingent of Slytherin students joining the rebellion as well. With Ginny's influence, maybe they'd side with Harry over Voldemort. And speaking of Harry, there is one more big thing we need to address about Ginny's change of circumstances. Would Ginny and Harry still end up together? Well, Ginny ends up in the same place eventually, fighting the good fight for the right cause. But without those evenings in the common room, getting close to Ron, Harry and Hermione, building a friendship first, without Harry seeing her competency on the Quidditch pitch, which is something he really admires because they're in the same Quidditch team, would they still have the foundations of a relationship blossom? Well, maybe, yeah. I mean, the relationship they end up having starts probably in the Order of the Phoenix. That's when they start to get much closer as friends. When Harry starts seeing her as her own competent, self-assured witch, as opposed to just Ron's little sister. And since we've already established that Ginny would almost certainly still join the DA, Harry would still start to see that side of her. In fact, maybe he'd see it more abruptly since he hasn't been spending any real time with her until now. And then he'd still see her at the Burrow in the summers, and then at the Slug Club. And maybe it would take them a little longer to get together. And it may be even more taboo because she's a Slytherin, although she's his best friend's little sister, so how much more taboo can it really get?
Either way, I think they might still get together.
That was surprisingly not a huge amount of change to the overall story, with Ginny being a Slytherin. Like, she still ends up with Harry, she still leads the Hogwarts Rebellion, she still opens the Chamber of Secrets. But was opening the Chamber of Secrets really that bad? Let's explore what would have happened in the Harry Potter series if Ginny hadn't opened the Chamber of Secrets.
What if the Chamber of Secrets had never been opened in Harry's second year? You won't believe how much impact this has not only on the story of the second book, but the entire series. Major characters end up dying, the war shifts in an entirely different direction, and it impacts so much more. So let's investigate. So to set the scene in this Harry Potter alternate universe, we first need to figure out why the Chamber of Secrets was not opened. And if you think about it, a lot of things could have happened to stop the chamber from being opened. If Lucius Malfoy just doesn't go to Flourish and Blotts at the same time as the Weasleys, he can't plant the diary on Ginny. When Ginny leaves the burrow, she forgets the diary and they have to turn around and go back for it. She might just not have realised she'd forgotten it until it was too late, or the Weasleys could have said, no, we're not turning around, we're already behind schedule. Arthur, who in the second book is in the midst of all these investigations looking into dark artifacts, may have recognised the diary for what it was while it was with Ginny at the burrow during the summer. He could have confiscated it and turned it over to the Ministry. Or Ginny could have just shown some common sense and handed the diary over once she started to realise how dark and evil it was. Although once it grasps hold of her, I imagine that's not likely to happen. So there are lots of ways the Chamber of Secrets being opened could have been prevented. Let's just assume Lucius Malfoy goes to Diagon Alley on a different day, and so he never gets to plant the diary on Ginny. So what happens? The most obvious impact is that the diary Horcrux is never destroyed. It's not at Hogwarts, Harry doesn't stab it with a basilisk fang, and it continues to preserve Voldemort's soul for years to come. I wonder if having it at Malfoy Manor for years would mean that eventually maybe Draco might find it and pour his soul into it, and he ends up getting possessed like Ginny does? I feel another what if video coming on. But back to the matter at hand, it's hard to imagine how anybody might find out that the diary was a Horcrux. The other Horcruxes were easy to track down and find out about. They followed a pattern. Hufflepuff's cup, Ravenclaw's diadem, Slytherin's locket. Even the Gaunt ring was traced back to Slytherin, with the Gaunts being his long-lost descendants. But how would anybody figure out the diary was a Horcrux? Maybe Dumbledore's research into Horcruxes would take him back 50 years to Myrtle's death and then somehow to the diary? But the thing about Dumbledore's research is he might not do it at all. Dumbledore says in the Half-Blood Prince, he only got confirmation that Voldemort was making Horcruxes when Harry handed him the diary. If there's no diary to hand him, well, Dumbledore never has that suspicion confirmed. And even if we give Dumbledore the benefit of the doubt, he does his research, finds out about the Horcruxes, identifies all of them, how are they going to destroy them? If the Chamber of Secrets was never open, Harry never fights with a basilisk, meaning he never stabs it with the sword of Gryffindor. The sword never gets impregnated with basilisk venom, which is what makes it able to destroy Horcruxes. And then they can't use it on the locket or Nagini. And more than that, Ron and Hermione can never get into the Chamber of Secrets during the Battle of Hogwarts to get a basilisk fang and use it to destroy the Hufflepuff cup. Because, well, the fang is still part of the basilisk, and none of them have any idea that the basilisk even exists at this point. So without the chamber being open, finding and destroying the Horcruxes becomes significantly harder. So we first meet Dobby the house elf in the Chamber of Secrets. Harry Potter must not return to Hogwarts! So it's pretty likely, without the events of the second year occurring, Dobby never really gets freed from the Malfoys. Not only would Dobby have nothing to warn Harry Potter about, and so they'd never meet, but also Harry would never have the diary to hide his sock in, giving it to Malfoy and tricking him into freeing his servant. And without Dobby's freedom, so much changes. Firstly, the second task in the Triwizard Tournament, Dobby's the one that gives Harry the gillyweed. And sure, Barty Crouch Jr. has manipulated this situation, and he could have just manipulated somebody else. He could have been more direct with Neville, but nothing else he'd tried was working, and Dobby was sort of his last-ditch effort. Dobby only gives Harry the gillyweed like 20 minutes before the task. In the Order of the Phoenix, Dobby tells Harry about the Room of Requirement. Now, I'm sure without the room, the DA could still find somewhere to practice, but would it be as good? Would it be as well equipped? Would it be as secretive, allowing them to keep doing the DA for as long as they do? Probably not, which means Dumbledore's army probably not as well trained by the time we start getting into battles in the later part of the series. And so would more of them be likely to die during the battle in the Department of Mysteries or the Battle of Hogwarts? Almost certainly. Plus, without the Room of Requirement, they'd never find or destroy Ravenclaw's diadem. Additionally, without Dobby's freedom, he'd never be able to save them all from Malfoy Manor when they get captured in the Deathly Hallows. And sure, that would mean Dobby himself doesn't die, but it could have terrible implications for Luna, Griphook, Ollivander, Harry, Ron, and most importantly, Hermione. Hermione is a Muggleborn, and if Dobby doesn't instigate the rescue when he does, I genuinely think she'd have been killed. Bellatrix or Fenrir Greyback would have slaughtered her there at Malfoy Manor. So without Dobby on side, so much could have gone wrong. Okay, this part could be particularly bad. If the Chamber of Secrets is never opened in Harry's second year, nobody knows about the basilisk, and certainly Harry doesn't get a chance to kill it. Therefore, Slytherin's monster, controlled by Voldemort as the heir of Slytherin, is still at large in the plumbing of the castle. Let's hope nobody important needs a wee at a crucial moment. And that's a scary thought in and of itself. But now imagine the Battle of Hogwarts. The students and the teachers fortify the school. Protective charms and enchantments are implemented around the castle. The Death Eaters are kept out. The students and staff are kept safe within. And then suddenly a basilisk emerges from the girls' bathroom and begins to prowl the castle. A single look directly into its eyes causes instant death. And among the panic and the chaos of the battle, I don't think anyone's taking the time to peer around corners with a mirror. A deadly basilisk within the castle, and a deadly army surrounding it. That sounds like the makings of a pretty terrible situation. So I can't really think of a scenario in which the good guys win if the Chamber of Secrets isn't opened. They don't know about all of the Horcruxes, and if they did somehow track them all down, they have nothing to destroy them with. And even if they did manage to destroy them all, somehow, by, I guess, throwing them all into the Room of Requirement after Goyle sets it alight with fiend fire, although they can't do that because they don't know about the Room of Requirement, unless maybe Harry finds it while he's stalking Malfoy and the Half-Blood Prince. Either way, even if they destroy all of the Horcruxes somehow, they are pinned between the basilisk and Voldemort's army. So Voldemort would win the war. And that means Lucius Malfoy planting the Riddle diary on Ginny Weasley in the Chamber of Secrets is the real reason Voldemort loses, which I guess makes Lucius Malfoy the real chosen one.
So it turns out the Chamber of Secrets being opened was maybe the best thing that could have happened to the good guys in Harry Potter. Ginny with a huge assist. So we focus a lot on the good guys in this video so far, so let's take a look at one of the villains now. Maybe my favourite villain. What would have happened if Barty Crouch Jr. hadn't died? Or, I guess being kissed by a Dementor isn't technically dying, right? You're just sort of there without a soul, but you know what I mean. He might as well have been dead.
Harry Potter has an assortment of villains, and it does a great job of making them evil in their own way. We have Voldemort, a psychopathic villain who just wants to live forever and rule the wizarding world. Umbridge, a more composed evil who's sort of sweet on the surface but really awful underneath, and she just sort of wants power for herself. And then there's Bellatrix, this chaotic evil who likes to torture children and lusts after a bold, noseless, evil psychopath, even though she's married. The villains of the series are done well. They have their own personalities, motivations, they bring their own set of circumstances to the story. But Barty Crouch Jr., I think, was this huge opportunity that we lost because he had his soul sucked out at the end of the Goblet of Fire. Because I really think he could have brought us so many great scenes and circumstances. So let me just explain that in this video. Barty Crouch Jr. is our hidden antagonist in the Goblet of Fire, and he does a great job in nurturing Harry through the Triwizard task so that he makes it to the graveyard to resurrect Voldemort at the very end of the year. As plots go, he brings so much to the narrative. There's the whole who put Harry's name in the Goblet of Fire mystery, and then the smaller, but also important, who is stealing from Snape's store cupboard question, as well as the whole Bertha Jorkins, Barty Crouch Sr. stories, where they both seem to go missing during the book. And all of these mysteries find their way back to Barty Crouch Jr. when we get the reveal at the end of the Goblet of Fire. He is at the centre of them all, and that makes the reveal at the end of the Goblet of Fire so satisfying. Because Barty Crouch Jr. isn't just a talented wizard. He isn't just a loyal follower of Voldemort. He's also a master manipulator, and clearly a good enough Occlumens that he can trick even Dumbledore and Snape for an entire year. Just think about that achievement when you learn about occlumency in the following book. Because Snape is good enough to fool Voldemort, and if Barty Crouch is good enough to fool Snape, he also must be a talented duelist if he can best Mad-Eye Moody at the start of the novel in order to capture him and impersonate him. All of that talent, and then the big reveal at the end of the Goblet of Fire, Barty Crouch Jr. loves it. He loves telling Harry how he put his name in the goblet. He loves talking to Harry about Voldemort's return, because he is obsessed and devoted to the Dark Lord. And genuinely, if he hadn't been given the Dementor's kiss at the end of the Goblet of Fire, I think he might have been the best antagonist of the series. Better than Voldemort, better than Bellatrix, better even than Umbridge. And by better, I mean more hated. Now, plot-wise, I know we couldn't keep Barty Crouch Jr. around because that would mean the Ministry in the Order of the Phoenix would know that Voldemort had returned, and therefore the entire plot of this book would change. But just imagine for a second, Barty Crouch Jr. doesn't receive the Dementor's kiss, and he goes to Azkaban. His loyalty to Voldemort doesn't wane in there, oh no. Instead, he is among others who are loyal to Voldemort, like Bellatrix. And so when, in the Order of the Phoenix, we get the mass breakout, much like Bellatrix and the other prisoners, Barty would run off and be reunited with the Dark Lord that he has served so loyally. And much like Bellatrix with Barty Crouch Jr. back out there on the loose again, we now have another exciting and interesting antagonist for us to have some wonderful moments with. And trust me when I say some of his moments would be fantastic. Barty Crouch Jr. in the Department of Mysteries at the end of the Order of the Phoenix. Oh, it would be great. Imagine instead of Lucius Malfoy, Barty leads the group of Death Eaters to retrieve the prophecy. And he comes face to face with Harry, and then he mocks Cedric's death. He points out to Harry that Cedric only died because Harry had to go to the graveyard, really pushing in on Harry's survivor's guilt. He could quip at Harry, making fun of the bond Harry thought he had with Moody, even though it was really with him the previous year. And then later in the battle, when the Order themselves actually show up, Barty could be dueling Mad-Eye Moody. Think of the quips and one-liners we could have had. Barty could make fun of Moody, talking about how he'd held him in a trunk for a whole year, and nobody even noticed that he wasn't the real Mad-Eye. Because Moody is this hardened aura, and we don't really get many moments of vulnerability with him, but if he came face to face with Barty Crouch Jr., with Barty making fun of those things from the year previous, I think we might see some moments of vulnerability from Alistair Moody there. That or some unhinged desire for revenge. Because in the Order of the Phoenix as we have it, Moody doesn't really address the previous year very much. But if Barty Crouch Jr. were still out there somewhere, maybe we would get some interactions between Moody and Harry all about that. Either way, I think having Barty Crouch Jr. in the Department of Mysteries at the end of this book would add some really cool extra dynamics to it, and it would make us as readers hate him even more. Fast forward a year and we have The Half-Blood Prince, and that book ends with Dumbledore's death. Hogwarts is under siege from Death Eaters thanks to Draco Malfoy, and again I think adding Barty Crouch Jr. to this scene would give us some great extra moments. Firstly, since some members of the Order of the Phoenix are there trying to defend the castle, I think having Barty come face to face with them again would give us some great moments, some quips, some sarcasm, but at the top of the astronomy tower, moments before Dumbledore dies, I think that's where things would get interesting. Draco has disarmed Dumbledore, and then the Death Eaters come storming in, the Carrows are there, Bellatrix is there. What if Barty Crouch Jr. was there as well? He storms in, he sees Dumbledore there unarmed, and he knows exactly what's about to happen. He knows Dumbledore is about to die. Dumbledore, who was there to see him as he was sentenced to Azkaban the first time, and the second time. I can imagine Barty Crouch Jr. reveling in that moment. I can see him mocking Dumbledore. Not only did he manage to trick Dumbledore for an entire year into thinking he was Mad-Eye Moody, besting Dumbledore's attempts at protecting Harry, but now he's here to see him die in his very own school. He bested his attempts to defend the castle, and he could really rub that in Dumbledore's face, that no matter what he does, they will always get the better of him. Because I really think Barty Crouch Jr. would be egged on by the fact that the only wizard Voldemort ever feared was about to die, and it would make him even more unhinged. If Barty Crouch Jr. was still alive at the beginning of the Deathly Hallows, he would have to take part in the Battle of the Seven Potters, and I would want him to be the one who kills Mad-Eye Moody. The two of them would have had a dance going on at this point for 4 books, kidnapping and impersonating him in the Goblet of Fire, dueling and mocking him at the end of the Order of the Phoenix, and so it would be a fitting end for him to kill Mad-Eye Moody in the Battle of the Seven Potters in the final book. Plus, if he killed Moody at the beginning of this book, imagine the impact that would have on us as an audience, how much it would make us hate him even more. He would be definitely at Bellatrix or Umbridge levels of hate, completely unhinged, drunk on the power that Voldemort's rise was affording him. He would feel untouchable, and then he defeats Mad-Eye Moody once and for all, and he'd love it, and we would hate him for it. So just a small detail as we move further through the Deathly Hallows, I would love it if after that happened, Barty Crouch Jr. was added to the faculty at Hogwarts. With Snape as headmaster, we see the Carrows become Dark Arts and Muggle Studies professors, but personally I think it would be a really cool callback if Barty Crouch Jr. was put in as the Dark Arts professor here. Like, I know we don't see too much of that year at Hogwarts because we're following the Horcrux hunt, which happens away from the castle, but just thinking about the fact that he could just rub it in McGonagall and Flitwick's faces all year, making fun of the fact that he tricked them all those years ago in the Goblet of Fire, making fun of the fact that Dumbledore was dead and Voldemort was going to win. I just think it would be a far more significant appointment if Barty Crouch Jr. were appointed as the Dark Arts professor than one of the Carrows, because Barty Crouch Jr. loved showing Harry's class the unforgivable curses in their 4th year. He loved using the Imperious Curse on them. And so if he were the Dark Arts professor, he could be in charge of punishment in the castle, and we know that punishment involved using the Cruciatus Curse on first years. Something, again, I think Barty Crouch Jr. would love, and would make us as readers hate him even more. At least until his eventual downfall, which would be even more satisfying. So the Deathly Hallows culminates in the Battle of Hogwarts, and I think that would be a fitting end for Barty Crouch Jr. after he's been built up as this mega secondary antagonist behind Voldemort. But I think since we already get Bellatrix and Voldemort dying at the climax of the Battle of Hogwarts, if Barty Crouch Jr. died right at the end, it would be a bit of overkill. Too many of those deaths would overshadow each other or pull away from each other's significance. But during the first half of the battle, prior to Harry going to the forest and being killed by Voldemort, I think that would be a great part for Barty Crouch Jr. to get his comeuppance. And if Barty Crouch Jr. was placed at Hogwarts during this book and did make those comments to McGonagall and Flitwick about Dumbledore's death, if he did rub it in and mock them all year, then I would want Harry to witness them being the ones to kill him. A duel in the castle, Barty Crouch Jr. against McGonagall and Flitwick. It would be epic on the scale of the Order of the Phoenix battle between Voldemort and Dumbledore. The magic we'd see, the quips and retorts, McGonagall and Flitwick not pulling their punches, knowing that he'd spent all year using the Cruciatus Curse on first-year students. An epic battle that ends with him eventually being defeated once and for all. Narratively, it would feel like an amazing moment of victory, and I think it would be great if we only got that for a small moment. Because Barty Crouch Jr. is defeated, we're celebrating as readers, and then boom, reality check. We start seeing the bodies of the good guys who have been lost in the battle already. Colin Creevey, Remus Lupin, Tonks, Fred. And then the battle continues as it does in the rest of the book. Harry goes to die, before eventually Voldemort and Bellatrix are defeated, just as they are in the book.
So even though it wouldn't impact much of the overall story, I still think Barty Crouch Jr. being around for longer would enrich things, right? And speaking of enriching, I recently talked about what I would do if I were in charge of turning the Goblet of Fire book into a season of TV for the HBO reboot. So you might want to check that video out next.